Welcome back guys, JimmyJules153 here with another Dreams Logic tutorial. Today we'll be going over the impact sensor. This is of course the impact sensor here, and it can detect when an object is touching another object, as well as how it's touching that object. We'll just go over the tweak menu quickly here. Up the top, we've got the Sense Impacts input. We can plug this into objects, and have the impact sensor affect multiple things. Just below this, we've got the sensitivity of the impact sensor, the touching output, the bumps output, which is the default output that shows on the face of the gadget, the rolls output, and the scrapes output. We'll go through each of these with an example. The first thing we'll go through is up the very top of the tweak menu, which is the Sense Impacts input. We can plug this into objects and have the impact sensor detect impacts also on that object in addition to whatever we've snapped it to. You can see here that I've got my impact sensor snapped to the object on the right and it's detecting impacts when the ball hits the cube. But because I've got the Sense Impacts plugged into this cube on the left as well, it's also detecting the impacts from this cube. I've just got the default output, which is the bumps, plugged into the cube's brightness here, just so it flashes when it detects an input. If I unplug this wire here, you can see that it stops detecting the inputs from this cube over here, and it only flashes when something impacts this cube. All you need to do for this is just grab the input and plug it straight into the cube. Just under the Sense Impacts input, we've then got the sensitivity slider, which is how sensitive the impact sensor will be to the impacts. So if we increase this to say around 2%, you can see the flashes are much brighter than before because it's more sensitive. We're going to jump down to the rolls output now, which will basically just output a signal with a strength corresponding to how quickly the object is rolling over another object. You can see here that we've got this sphere that's set up to roll down this ramp, and as it starts to roll, and as it gets faster, it gets brighter and brighter. We'll just go back and have a look at the setup here. We've just got the rolls output plugged directly into the brightness, so that it will get brighter the faster it rolls. We've also got the signal going into this number display here, so you can see as it rolls down the hill, the number increases because it gets faster. Now we'll go through the touching output. This will basically just output a signal when the object is touching another object. You can see here that the sphere is set up above this cube, and when the sphere touches the cube it lights up, but when it touches the ground it does not. This is where the labels come in. You can see here that we've got our impact sensor on the labels page of the tweak menu. We've got it to only detect when it's impacting something with the label of friend. If we go into the tweak menu of our sculpt here, the cube, and go to the labels page, you can see that we've got our cube labeled as friend. So basically, when this sphere is touching this cube, and only when it's touching this cube, it will light up. If we go back to the main page on the tweak menu here, you can see the touching port there and it will light up, sending the signal to the sphere, and it will turn off because it's no longer touching that friend label. You can use this for things like detecting when a player is touching a certain surface. So if we press play here, when the puppet touches the lava, the badly sculpted lava, it'll start losing health. That's its health. If we just go through that setup on the puppet, you can ignore this follower here, that's just making it walk onto the lava, and this number displayer is just displaying the health above his head. So all that we've really got doing this is just this impact sensor set to the touching, so whenever he's touching something, labeled with friend again, and we've just got the lava labeled as friend. So whenever the player is touching the lava, it'll activate this health modifier that's set up to decrease the player's health continuously. You can see that initially it's turned off. When we hit play, he'll walk onto the lava and the health modifier will turn on. Next up, we've got the bumps output, which is again just the default output on the front of the gadget. This will output a signal with a strength corresponding to how heavy the impact is between the two objects. So you can see that the lower sphere here doesn't really give off much of a flash at all. The second sphere gives off a bit of a brighter flash, and the third sphere, that's the highest, impacts the floor the hardest and outputs the brightest flash. You can use this bumps for things like detecting when a player has been hit by something, for example, a bullet. You can see here the bullet's going quite slowly and it's not impacting him very much at all, so it's not sending that much of a signal to these keyframes. Just on this setup here, I've got the impact sensor plugged into this randomizer, and it's sending the signal that the impact sensor generates through the randomizer, through the input to randomize port, and it's sending it to these keyframes. So if the impact sensor doesn't output much of a signal at all, it won't send much of a signal to these keyframes, so they won't activate very much. You can see these keyframes if I select one of them. It's quite a dramatic pose, but when that keyframe activates, because it's getting such a small signal, he doesn't go into that pose very much. But if, for example, I was to increase the speed of this bullet, let's say to 5 for now, you can see that he starts to react a little more heavily. It's because the impact sensor is sending a stronger signal through the randomizer into these keyframes. And if we turn it up even higher, you can see he just about does a full pose with the keyframes. Finally, guys, we've just got the scrapes output. This will detect when the object is scraping over another object. On this microchip on the top here, I've just got this little setup to make it go backwards and forwards along the ground. And I've just got this number displayer here, hooked up to receive the signal of the scraped output. You can see the faster the object is scraping along the ground, the brighter it gets. You can also see the cube at its fastest point is outputting the strongest signal from this number displayer. Now each of these outputs is also a fat wire, so we'll just go through the signals that those fat wires carry now. I'll just turn a few of these off initially. Okay. So when we plug this fat wire into a splitter, we get 3 outputs here. We get the impact, which is the default signal that you get if you plug the fat wire directly into something like a number displayer. You can see this number displayer here is hooked up to this impact port, and it's receiving the exact same signal as the fat wire plugged directly into the number displayer. Just under this, we've got the surface type, and this is an audio surface type. So this is basically telling us what type of ground that this scrape is happening on, or this impact is happening on in this case. So if we go into the ground settings here, into the tweak menu, and go to the very last page on that tweak menu, we've got the audio surface type. On here, we've got default, metal, stone, and a few other materials there, just for audio surfaces. So if we change the audio surface type from default to, let's say, metal, you can see that this number up the top here changes to a 1. That's because this audio surface type is now metal. If we change it back to default, it changes back to 0. And basically, as we increment through these audio surface types, it will increment this number up the top here, which is plugged into this surface type. So you could use this for things like detecting what sort of a surface the player is standing on and doing specific things based on that information. We'll just turn these 2 number displayers off now, and we'll go to this other output down here. This last output is the position. So this is basically the position that this scrape is happening. So I'll turn on these 3 number displayers, which is just the X, Y, and Z axis information. So you can see down the bottom here we've got the X, Y, and the Z axis, which is coming from the A, B, and C port respectively. And you can see this cube isn't really moving much on the Y or Z axis, it's mainly moving on the X axis. So you can see this number here is changing from between a 5 and a 5.5, because it's moving about a half a meter in the x-axis. Anyway, that's just about all for the impact sensor, guys. If this video helped you, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.